3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
We'll start looking at them a little more carefully. Some of them that looks like a breccia right there. Yeah, there's some interesting patterns on the surface.
Корабль «Союз-6» с высокой...
Clear the tower.
Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff with Apollo 14.
С космическим кораблем «Союз-10».
And we have liftoff. The clock is running, all engines running, we have a liftoff. And the second man crew. We have a liftoff. Liftoff, the engine's building up to 1.6 million.
We have a liftoff. All engines filling up the front. Подъем! Поехали! Поехали! До встречи на земле! Нашел контакт.
We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start. America's first space shuttle. And the shuttle has cleared the tower. We have ignition. We have ignition of the solid rocket boosters and liftoff.
Liftoff. We do have a liftoff. Tower clear.
We have solid motor ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of America's space shuttle on it.
Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the first operational space shuttle mission with two liftoff. Liftoff of Orbiter Challenger.
And liftoff. Liftoff of STS-7 and America's first woman astronaut.
We have ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff 32 minutes after the hour.
Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia and the first flight of the European
Rocket booster ignition and liftoff of Challenger and the 10th Space Shuttle flight.
And liftoff. Liftoff of Challenger and the first flight to repair a satellite in space.
We have SRB ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff of mission 41B. The first
Houston controlling now. All main engines running at 100%.
Liftoff. Liftoff of Discovery and the first flight to retrieve and and liftoff. Liftoff of Discovery, the first flight totally dedicated to the...
We have SRB ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of mission 51D and the 7...
0. SRB ignition and Challenger and Spacelab 3 is airborne and ahead.
ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Discovery.
We have liftoff of Challenger and Spacelab 2. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of A-51I. Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Atlantis. A new orbiter joined.
We have ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Challenger and the Spacelab D1 mission.
And liftoff. Liftoff of the space shuttle, and it has cleared the tower.
We have ignition. We have liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia and mission 61C.
Главное, подъем.
And liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery. Ignition and liftoff. Atlantis begins another space voyage.
SRB ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of STS-29 as this.
And liftoff. A new era for planetary science begins.
And liftoff. Liftoff on Columbia and its return to flight.
We have ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and the Galileo spacecraft bound for Jupiter.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery. For it.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Columbia. A new decade of spaceflight begins. Ignition and liftoff of Atlantis and mission STS-36.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
Ignition and liftoff of Discovery and the Ulysses spacecraft bound for the pole. Booster ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Atlantis and crew and the...
0 and liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia and Astro 1. The Space Shuttle Atlantis and the Gamma Ray Observatory seeking out the explosive forces of the universe.
We have ignition and liftoff of Discovery on a research flight for the Department of Defense.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a 9-day mission to deploy the Tigris communication satellite.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery and the Upper Atmosphere Research Satellite.
Liftoff of Atlantis and the 6-man crew on a Department of Defense flight.
liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery and the first International Microgravity Laboratory.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to planet...
Booster ignition and liftoff of the maiden voyage of Endeavour on a satellite rescue mission.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia and the first extended duration mission, a step...
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission for new utility in space.
Solid rocket ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Endeavour on America's 50th space shuttle flight.
Ignition and liftoff of Columbia on an ambitious 10-day international...
Liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery on a 7-day mission for the Department of Defense.
And liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with NASA's newest tracking station in the sky.
We have ignition. We have liftoff of Discovery on the second mission to Planet Earth research flight.
And liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia on a voyage to the future.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on the first spacecraft mission and the retrieval of the Eureka spacecraft.
Well met with you.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, launching the next generation of communication satellite technology.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Columbia on a life sciences mission for Earth and space.
Liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on an ambitious mission to service the Hubble Space Telescope.
Liftoff of Discovery on a bold new era of spaceflight between the United States and Russia.
Liftoff. Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia as NASA continues on the cutting edge of microgravity research.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, observing the changes of planet Earth.
Liftoff. Liftoff of Columbia on a multi-nation research flight.
Of Space Shuttle Discovery, developing new techniques to monitor our Earth's environment from space.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on a mission to study the Earth's ever-changing environment.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on a mission to study planet Earth.
Shuttle Discovery on a mission to prepare for the next era of world cooperation in space.
Booster ignition and
liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery to complete NASA's constellation of tracking stations in the sky.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia, catapulting scientific knowledge through microgravity research.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis with the Russian docking module, the threshold
to ignition and liftoff of Endeavour in pursuit of a Japanese satellite.
And we have liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia, continuing space research through tether satellite technology.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the third shuttle-mirrored docking flight.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour to develop the practical and the beneficial aspects of space.
And we have liftoff of the Space Shuttle Columbia on the International Life Science Microgravity mission.
We have booster ignition and liftoff of Atlantis on the fourth flight to dock with the Russian space station.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a 10-day mission to dock with Russia's orbiting outpost.
The three-stage Soyuz U rocket launched safely, defying the concerns of some space experts who said it was built with parts.
Liftoff. Discovery now on its way to service NASA's Hubble Space Telescope.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, maintaining America's constant presence in space.
Liftoff of Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory, a research bridge.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery on a mission to study planet Earth.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, extending America's presence in space while opening new chapters.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission combining science and the practical aspects of space.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, continuing the union of U.S. and Russian space endeavors.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia on a mission expanding our knowledge and understanding of the human nervous system.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery as NASA embarks on the final mission.
Ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery on the first mission to dock with the orbiting International Space Station.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Columbia, reaching new heights for women in X-ray astronomy.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery on a mission to repair the Hubble Space Telescope.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour on a 21st century mission placing Earth back on the map.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, a space shuttle for the 21st century.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, opening the door to a permanent human presence in space.
And liftoff of Discovery, making shuttle history and building our future in space.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, providing power to the station as we continue to build our future in space.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis with Destiny, laboratory for the 21st century.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, extending the reach of the space station.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, launching a door to partnerships in space.
Ignition and liftoff of Discovery, carrying the third crew of astronaut residents to the International Space.
Oh my God! Liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia, the raw power in a 3-step fashion to 72% of.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, extending our reach while expanding our research in space. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, building the station and our future in space.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour with another building block for the foundation of the International Space Station.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
Space Shuttle Discovery, beginning America's new journey to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, opening a new chapter in the completion of the International Space Station.
ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, lighting up the nighttime sky.
Liftoff of the Soyuz rocket, transporting new residents to the International Space Station.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis to assemble the framework for the science laboratories of tomorrow. Liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour, expanding the International Space Station while creating a classroom in space.
And liftoff of Discovery, hoisting harmony to the heavens and opening new gateways.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis as Columbus sets sail on a voyage of science to the space station. Liftoff of Endeavour, going where East and West do meet at the International Space Station.
Liftoff of the next residents of the International Space Station. The Soyuz has cleared the tower.
Liftoff of Shuttle Discovery. Combate Kudasai. Best of luck to the International Space Station's newest laboratory.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour, preparing our home in space for a larger international family. Booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery, taking the space station to full power for full science.
Главное, подъем.
Есть подъем. Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, the final visit to enhance the vision of Hubble.
Главное, подъем.
Liftoff of Endeavour, completing Kibo and fulfilling Japan's hope. The liftoff of Discovery, celebrating its 25th birthday by racking up science and supplies.
Главное, подъем.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research.
Liftoff of Shuttle Endeavour with NASA's final space station crew compartment that brings a bay window view to our celestial backyard.
The liftoff of Discovery, blazing a trail to scientific discoveries aboard space station.
Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis, reaching the crest of its historic achievements in space.
And the final liftoff of Discovery, a tribute to the dedication, hard work, and pride of America's Space Shuttle team.
Liftoff for the final launch of Endeavour, expanding our knowledge while expanding our lives. Liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis. On the shoulders of the Space Shuttle, America will continue the dream.
Program, Houston.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Means liftoff. Liftoff confirmed. We can feel it. Everything's okay on board.
Light speed.
Liftoff. Liftoff of the Soyuz TMA-05M.
Главное, подъем. Хорошо, контакт подъема. Двигатели центральные. Главное. Ура! Мы поехали! Главное, подъем.
Поехали.
起飞，T007:30。
Three, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA. Go SpaceX. Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
And resilience.
Liftoff. Godspeed, Endeavour, and Crew 2.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
And liftoff. God free.
起飞，T0:14:44:14。烟火。
Подъем. Прошел контакт подъема. Двигатели центрального и боковых блоков ракет.
Liftoff of Crew 6. Go Dragon, go Falcon.
起飞，T0:09:13分13秒。
Liftoff. Go Falcon, go Dragon, go Crew 7. Liftoff of NASA Crew 8. Go Falcon, go SpaceX, and go NASA. Liftoff of Crew 9. Go SpaceX, go Falcon, go NASA.